Yes, guys, welcome back to the MMA Sucker Podcast. I'm your host, Fraser Crone, and let's jump straight into things. UFC 303. What a great event we had. Lots to talk about before the event even happened. Obviously, this is supposed to be the return of Conor McGregor taking on Michael Chandler. We got the short notice fight between Jiri Prochazka and Alex Pereira in their rematch for the light heavyweight belt. We then also got a bonus featherweight bout between Diego Lopes and Brian Ortega. That fight got changed the night before the weigh-ins to a lightweight bout, 155 pounds, because Brian Ortega was struggling to make the weight. Then on 4 hours' notice, the gangster Dan Ige stepped in to take on Diego Lopes on, like I said, very, very short notice. Does fairly well. I'll go on to talk about that one later. Catch weight of, I think it was 160 or 165 pounds. To save Diego Lopes, having to lose out on having a fight. We also had Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Smith. This card has gone through so many changes. It was hard to keep up, and no one really would have been that surprised if the changes would have affected the card and affected the fact that the card may not have sort of popped like we maybe expected it to. But I think after a slow start to the card, it really went well. I think it was a really good card. Just running down the prelims, so I don't want to talk an awful lot about the prelims. It's all about the main card for me. There's 3 or 4 fights on the main card that I really want to highlight. Vinicius Oliveira, second UFC win now. Obviously, we had that flying knee on his knockout on his debut, flying knee knockout on his debut. Dominated Ricky Simone fairly convincingly in the opening fight of the night. Ray Teixeira was not an entertaining fight, I'll be honest. Really quite a boring fight. Just looking at the stats now, a combined 38 significant strikes. So maybe don't go back and watch that one. Martin Buday versus Andrei Arlovski. I mean, heavyweights that go the distance, they're never the most entertaining fights. Gillian Robertson got the win over Michelle Waterson Gomez by decision. So the first 4 fights all went the distance, which, potentially worrying fans. But Michelle Waterson Gomez loses to Gillian Robertson and has now retired. Now, I put a tweet out, so not to be harsh, but she had a bang average or below par UFC career. Michelle Waterson Gomez. She had a 6-9 promotional record with 5 straight losses to finish. But it's not her fault. She's not a strawweight. She's always an atom weight. And I think if it wasn't the UFC name, she would have gone and fought at atom weight in a different organization. But obviously, she likes being in the UFC for the pay and the exposure that she got. But 6-9, she won't go down as a sort of legend of the game, I don't think, in my opinion. But again, it's difficult to judge her because it's not solely her fault. Then we got Peyton Talbot doing Peyton Talbot things. 19-second knockout in the first round. Absolutely phenomenal performance. Again, from probably the hottest prospect, one of the hottest prospects in the UFC today. After that performance last time out against Cameron Simon, he was taking on Gay Hamori in this one. He was the biggest favorite on the card. He was, I think, at one point in the week, he was the biggest favorite in UFC history, and he showed exactly why. 19-second knockout. Andre Feely and Cub Swanson did exactly what we'd expect them to do, put on a fight of the night. It was back and forth action throughout. And these are two veterans of the game, two veterans of the featherweight division. Just two really fun fighters to watch. Jean Silva got the knockout, the one-punch uppercut knockout of Charles Jourdain, despite missing weight. It does rub me up the wrong way a little bit that he obviously got the win despite missing weight, but it is what it is. Joe Pyfer, pretty flawless performance against Marc-Andre Barriault. Landed 8 strikes, didn't get Marc-Andre Barriault didn't land a single shot. 1 minute 25. He closed the distance. He clipped Marc-Andre Barriault, had him up against the fence, then worked the body and worked the head really well and properly slept him, like properly slept him. In what was, Joe Pyfer, he called out Paul Craig. I don't know about Joe Fife. I'm still, the jury's still out for me. Yeah, yes, he's got legitimate one punch knockout power, but we saw him badly exposed against Jack Manson, and he was dominated against Jack Manson. Let's not forget that. And that was on the feet where he's supposed to be the sort of the better guy. He was dominated by Jack Manson, but it's good to see someone like Joe Fife back in the win column because he is an exciting fighter to have. You know, he- Winning. But now we move on to what everyone really, really cares about, the main card. Opening up the main card, we had Ian Machado Garry defeat Michael Venom Page by unanimous decision after 3 rounds of fairly competitive action. I thought it was a really competitive fight. Ian Garry knew, and Ian Garry's team at Shooter Box knew that he couldn't hang with MVP on the feet, and the second round showed that. The first round would have been a lot more interesting for me. MVP threw the high kick and got it caught. If he hadn't have got the kick caught, would Ian Garry have been able to get it to the floor as easily as he did in that first round? Obviously, then work that submission, work that rear naked choke. I'm not so sure, but I think MVP really defended the choke well. I think he did well to, not allow Ian Garry to ever settle into that choke. Joe Rogan was convinced that Ian Garry had the tightest rear naked choke you've ever seen. And of course, Joe Rogan, as I've said time and time again, needs to be a little bit more realistic with the sort of calls that he's making, in my opinion. Second round started, and again, MVP badly pieced up Garry on the feet, really, really badly. He looked to sort of straighten the legs of Garry a couple of times, but there wasn't an awful lot of action throughout the entire fight. It's got UFC stats up here. Ignoring the total strikes, because a lot of the total strikes were on the ground or in the clinch, just kind of not powerful, damaging strikes. Ian Machado Garry across 3 rounds landed 19 strikes. Michael Venom Page landed just 21 strikes. But Ian Garry did what he needed to do. The third round was a difficult one to score. I've seen a lot of people online score it as a draw because if we just look at the third round, Ian Garry, 28 total strikes. Michael Venom Page, 14 total strikes. Control time for Ian Garry, 1 minute 56. Control time for MVP, 1 minute 37. Yeah. There's very little in that third round, but I wouldn't, I, if MVP was a little bit more urgent in getting Garry off his back towards the end of the fight, or even himself getting to his feet and working his stand-up game a little bit more, he could have stolen the round, in my opinion. There wasn't a lot of action, so I'm not mad about it being scored for Garry and ultimately winning him the fight. Just looking at the rankings now, Michael Venom Page ranked number 14, Ian Machado Garry ranked number 7. I don't imagine those two guys will change their ranking at all because logically, obviously Michael Venom Page lost. Ian Machado Garry fought someone 7 rankings below him. Doesn't make sense for him to increase his ranking at all. For me, there's 3 possible fights for Ian Garry. You have a fight with Jack Della Maddalena. It's nowhere near going to be ready for UFC 305. I think Jack Della Maddalena is still suffering through a few injuries, but that is a really competitive fight. Jack Della Maddalena is boxing. Ian Garry's kickboxing. I think, both men speak well. They're both young. They're both, I think, undefeated. I'm not sure if Jack Della is undefeated. Undefeated in the UFC. I'm not sure if he's undefeated in his career. I think he's got 1 loss on that record. Oh, he's got 2 losses on his record, but they're in his first 2 fights. So he's undefeated since, the 15th of October 2015 is when he began this 17 fight win streak. I think that's the fight to make for me. Jack Della Maddalena versus Ian Garry. Or does Ian Garry look to fight Colby Covington? Colby seemed very dismissive of that fight. Or, and I mean, he's not stupid. He did not say Shavkat Rakhmonov's name. We all know that they want the belt. They want the belt off Leon Edwards or Bilal Muhammad, depending on who wins that fight next month. For me, I think it's Jack Della is the fight to make, but where the UFC go with that one, I'm not quite sure. I don't think, as they showed in this fight, that they're scared to put 2 sort of fan favorite prospects up against each other. But like I said, it was a professional performance by Ian Garry. I don't think he did enough to set the world on fire, but he did enough to win the fight against a very tricky opponent in MVP, someone who, you know, is just confusing. For me, the next fight for MVP, without a shadow of a doubt, now it makes sense, to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in the main event. Why not? Why not? None of these guys, it's proven, are ever going to be UFC champion. They're probably never going to break the top five again in Thompson's favor. They're legitimate headliners. There'll be a lot of respect between the two men. Book it, in my opinion. Moving on, Macy Chiasson, sorry, versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Bueno Silva obviously coming off the title loss to Raquel Pennington. Chiasson coming off the submission, I think it was, win over Pani Kianzad last time out. Very competitive first round. Really enjoyed that first round. It was two women just going out there. Significant strikes landed. 42 for Bueno Silva, 37 for Chiasson. Um, Really good takedown defense for Macy Chiasson. Really good knees off the break for both women, and they fought on the inside a lot. Bueno Silva wasn't moving ahead at all, and then that second round started, and Chiasson landed the takedown and busted Bueno Silva up with one of the most brutal elbows you're going to see. I'm not going to overlay a photo of it. You can go online and see it because it's a savage elbow, like I said. And she busted her open. She cut her open. You could see her smile as soon as she landed the elbow and saw the cut. Macy Chiasson smiled because she knew that that was a significant strike to potentially end the fight, which in time it did. Chris Toglioni, the referee, when the two women separated, Chiasson let Bueno Silva back up to her feet. Referee stepped in. Doctor said the cut was too deep to carry on. Bueno Silva was disappointed, of course she is, but she also has to recognise that that was a massive cut that she suffered at the elbow of Chiasson. For me, it's a difficult one because I just think, you've got two or three women now. Number seven's just beat number three. Chiasson was ranked number seven, Bueno Silva ranked number three. You've got two or three women now that are clearly in line for a shot at the title. You've got Raquel Pennington, obviously, at the top of the tree. Excuse me. Juliana Pena apparently they've been booked to fight each other, which for me is extremely confusing. I don't think Juliana Pena should be anywhere near a title shot. Um, because I'm pretty sure I'm right, but well, I know I'm right. Her last fight was one of the most embarrassing performances by a champion that we've ever seen. Let's not forget she was the champion heading into the rematch with Amanda Nunes, and many people were asking the question as to whether she could be the one to, is she Amanda Nunez's kryptonite? She put in one of the most embarrassing performances, like I said, we've ever seen from a champion. She got 50-43'd by Amanda Nunes. Now, Amanda Nunes is one of the best women, if not probably she is the GOAT female MMA fighter. But even so, 50-43 is embarrassing for a champion to go out there and lose 50-43 and to get an immediate rematch with Raquel Pennington. Raquel Pennington's not stupid. She's calling for the fight with Juliana Pena because she's the easiest fight of the two or three women that are in and around that title picture. Ketlen Vieira is a tough fight. She's very good. She's a very good boxer and she's got a good ground game. And of course, Kayla Harrison is the sort of boogie lady of the division. It rubs me up the wrong way a little bit that Juliana Pena is going to get the next shot because I don't think she deserves it. You've got Macy Chiasson, who's now on a 2-fight winning streak against legitimate, against number 11 girl, against the number 3 girl. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Macy Chiasson versus Kayla Harrison. I know Chiasson's not exactly the biggest of names in the division, but Kayla Harrison probably needs one more fight to solidify herself as top of the division, title shot inevitable. And Chiasson could provide that. It's a good stylistic matchup, in my opinion, for Kayla Harrison as well. But a really good performance by Chiasson, earned her a performance of the night bonus. Not going to dwell too much on Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Smith. It was all right. It was okay. Like I say, it was okay. It looked like neither guy had prepared, as did the fight afterwards with Diego Lopes and Dan Ige. It looked like Roman Dolidze and Anthony Smith had taken the fight on short notice. There wasn't a lot of specific tactics for their opponents, if that makes sense. What I mean by that is it looked like a glorified spar. They were laughing and joking in there at times. Um, and it looked like there wasn't a clear game plan from either man. It looked like the coaches had kind of gone, go in there, see what happens, see what he does, and react to that, rather than having a specific game plan to defeat the guy in front of you. Roman Dolidze is a man that got the victory in that. I want to see him drop back down to middleweight. I know he's now, I think he's undefeated at light heavyweight, but regardless, he looked undersized in there against Anthony Smith, who isn't the biggest light heavyweight in the world ever either. But Roman Dolidze does snap his 2-fight losing streak with that unanimous decision victory over Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith wins one, loses one, wins three, loses two, wins two, loses one. Anthony Smith is just there as he is a journeyman MMA fighter, something that we don't often see. Let's not forget that this guy did compete against John Jones off the back of three good victories. Rashad Evans, Mauricio Shogun, and Volkan Ozdemir. Lost the belt to John Jones, beat Alexander Gustafsson. But then, he's been very much up and down. 38-20 record. It is what it is. Now, the co-main event was Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. And when I went to sleep last night, the co-main event was Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. When I woke up this morning, the co-main event was Dan Ige versus Diego Lopes. Brian Ortega was taken ill yesterday. Dan Ige, like the gangster that he is, messaged and said, "Look, this is the heaviest I've ever been. I'm fit. I'm ready to go. Put me in there. This is what legends are made of." And this is what legends are made of. I think Dan Ige probably not only got his show money, but got a very good bonus for being for making the walk into this fight. And I think that we will see Dan Ige in the sphere. And I think that we will see Diego Lopes in the sphere. I know Dan Ige had a fight booked for July. Let me just double check when that was because I forget. I forget the actual date. I think it was July the 20th. So it wasn't, yeah, it was July the 20th. The fight night card that's headlined by Amanda Lemos and Vera Jandiroba. Sorry, that was in the Apex against Sherp Maraskal. Apologies if I've pronounced that wrong, but 50K, Dan Ige steps in on. It's not like he stepped in on a week's notice. It's not like he stepped in on a day's notice. This guy admitted in his post-fight interview that he was getting a massage and gets the call. And not only did he get the call, he answered the call. He made the walk. He got a team together. I think Sean Strickland was in his corner. Eric Nixick, Kai Kamaka, I think, was also in his corner. Dan Ige is a gangster. And he did something that other people have not been able to do with Diego Lopes. Gavin Tucker, Pat Sabatini, Sadiq Youssef, none of them could go the distance with Diego Lopes. And Dan Ige done it on 3 or 4 hours notice. Really good performance by Dan Ige. Obviously, he lost the fight, 29-28 on all scorecards. He won that final round. I think if the fight was a 5-round fight, I think it was leaning towards Dan Ige. Diego Lopes had to shoot for a takedown in that final round because he was really struggling with the stand-up game of Dan Ige. But again, it looked like a fight between two guys who hadn't game planned for each other, which, that's no knock on those guys at all. Like I said, Dan Ige is taking it on 4 hours notice, but you've also got to remember Diego Lopes is taking it on 4 hours notice. Diego Lopes cut weight the day before to get down to 146, then to go weigh in at 155. Then he only ballooned up to 161. He was taking on a completely different stylistic matchup. Brian Ortega, good on the feet, but dangerous on the ground. So he had to, he probably wasn't looking to take the fight to the ground, probably didn't drill an awful lot of wrestling. He wanted to keep it on the feet against that Brian Ortega. Against Dan Ige, it's a complete opposite. He's a knockout puncher. So he maybe wanted to look to ground the opponent. Diego Lopes showed in those first couple of rounds, I think he just showed a little bit more sharpness, and that sharpness really came through that especially in that first round, he was just a little bit quicker, and he was a little bit quicker in finding his range. And then that final round, like I say, Dan Ige began to take over in that final round. But if I'm Dana White or if I'm Dan Ige, I demand a spot at on the Sphere Show in September. He jumped in on 4 hours notice. It's for me now, it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I could not imagine having a fifth fight in front of thousands of people in 4 hours. He did it. He went the full 15 minutes. His cardio didn't wait. He didn't look tired. Like I said, he was on top in that third round and won that third round. Really solid performance by Dan Ige. Diego Lopes remained, he enjoys now a 4 fight win streak. And you've got to think, you got to feel for Diego Lopes because he starts the day, or he started the fight week taking on Brian Ortega. He's ranked number 14. Brian Ortega's ranked number 3. He then goes into his weight cut, and apparently he was only a couple of pounds off making 145. And and Brian Ortega switches the goalpost, says, "I'm not going to make 145. I won't make 150. Can we put it at 155?" Okay, we'll put it at 155, but I don't want that to, Diego Lopes can still say, look, we're two featherweights. I can take your ranking if I beat you, but we're just competing at 155. He then has to drop far down the ranking. He then gets the fight cancelled. As far as Diego Lopes is concerned, he gets the fight cancelled. Dan Ige steps in. He accepts the fight with Dan Ige. Completely different stylistic matchup. But Dan Ige is only ranked one ranking above Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes will likely now take his ranking. But for me, Diego Lopes deserves a top 5 fight next, whether it be a rematch with Movsar Evelev, a Yair Rodriguez, a Brian Ortega rematch, allowing Brian Ortega to, safely cut the weight down to 145. Anyone in and around the top 5, Diego Lopes deserves the shot at because he's put up with a lot of shit this week, for want of a better term. He's taken it all in his stride, and he's just done what's needed to be done, really. Hats off to Diego Lopes. Hats off, mullets out. Diego Lopes deserves all the props in the world. And a man who also deserves all the props in the world is a man who, for me, is top 3 pound for pound. Probably the biggest star in the UFC today, not named Conor McGregor. He's a 2-weight world champion. His name is Alex Pereira, and he is phenomenal. Let's not forget, he was in Australia 3 weeks ago when he got the call that McGregor was out of this fight. He was suffering with broken toes, similar to what McGregor pulled out with. So not a great look for Conor. And he takes on a very strange stylistic matchup in Jiri Prochazka. Prochazka also, again, props to Jiri Prochazka taking on probably the most dangerous striker in the UFC today on 3 weeks' notice. It's a rematch, of course, of their November fight last year, where Prochazka was knocked out in the second round. And the foreshadowing of that fight very much sort of occurred in this fight. Alex Pereira, I was more nervous than Alex Pereira watching that fight because I figured I had an understanding that one guy would get knocked out. I was more nervous than Alex Pereira watching the fight, sat at home, than Alex Pereira seemed to be in the fight, being the man in the moment. I cannot understand how he remains so calm, cool, and collected in every single moment. For me, he is without a doubt the best striker we have in the UFC today. First round, he's landed the low kicks. He's landed some power, and he doesn't just use the jab as a range finder. He uses the jab as a weapon, and it rips into the face of Jiri Prochazka, and it stuns Jiri Prochazka a couple of times. He's of course landing the low kicks like he always does. I think the low kick is used by Alex Pereira really well as sort of like a rangefinder because he knows exactly where his opponent is when he lands that leg kick and the distance between him and his opponent when he lands that leg kick. He was busy in the clinch when Jiri did close the distance. He closed the distance well and wasn't hurt closing the distance into the clinch, Jiri Prochazka. And Alex Pereira did really well to defend from the clinch. He didn't receive any damage in the clinch. He wasn't taken down in the clinch, of course. And he looks a lot stronger than Jiri Prochazka in the clinch. And then the end of the first round, where Alex Pereira, Jiri Prochazka dives forward with a backhand, and Alex Pereira lands that left hook and it dropped Jiri Prochazka. And I think that Jiri Prochazka was momentarily out because he had no idea where he was. The horn sounded, and Jiri Prochazka dropped to his back and sort of, called Alex Pereira down to say, come and grapple with me. But the round was over. Herb Dean had stepped in, and then the second round begins, and of course, Alex Pereira closes the distance extremely quickly because he knows he's got a wounded animal in front of him. And he did something that we haven't seen him do an awful lot. He did something that we didn't see him do in this fight, but we haven't seen him throw an awful lot of switch head kicks. And he landed the most perfect switch head kick to drop Jiri Prochazka. The fight should have been called instantly. I don't know what Herb Dean was waiting for. Herb Dean should have jumped in straight away and stopped the fight. He didn't. Alex Pereira landed maybe 10 more unanswered strikes. Jiri Prochazka was not defending himself, not intelligently defending himself. And Alex Pereira scores yet another knockout. Now, if we just look down Alex Pereira's record, it's insane. As we all know, he's 11-2. Now, at light heavyweight, he's 4-0. He's gone the distance once with Jan Blachowicz. And then since then, Jiri Prochazka, second round knockout. Jamar Hill, earlier this year, first round knockout. Jiri Prochazka again, second round knockout. You look in the space of from this time last year, he's 4-0. Like I said, he's moved up to heavyweight, to light heavyweight. But his body of work from his debut and the flying knee knockout on his debut in November of 2021, he's just been one of the most active fighters. He had 9 fights, 8 wins, 1 loss. He's captured belts in 2 divisions. Alex Pereira is that guy. He's fought now with a broken toe. He battered his toe in this round in this fight by the looks of it. And to go out there with the confidence that you are just going to win the fight. Now, all of these fighters have confidence that they're going to win the fight, but no one is quite as calm, cool, and collected and as confident as Alex Pereira. It's probably the most complete performance we've seen by Alex Pereira, in my opinion, because he set up what he needed to set up in that first round. And for that, you've got to take into account the level of the opponent, the style of the opponent. Jiri Prochazka is one of the strangest strikers we've ever seen, and he was out. He was trying to get back to his feet, and he was all over the place. He could barely stand up. Why they let him stand up, I'm not really sure, but it was such a good performance by Alex Pereira. Words almost can't describe just how good Alex Pereira was in that main event. Take into account that he stepped up on short notice. Take into account that he had broken toes. Take into account that this is International Fight Week. He steps in on 3 weeks' notice to save the card when no one else is willing to, against a very strange, difficult stylistic matchup. And of course, we have to ask what's next for Alex Pereira. For me, there's 2 possible fights. Personally, I'm only interested in a move up to heavyweight for Alex Pereira. And yes, he hasn't cleared out the division. He's beat the number 1 guy. He's beat the number 3 guy. He's beat the number 4 guy. The number 5 guys are coming off a loss. It's more than likely going to be the number 2 guy, Magomed Ankalaev, which is a tough fight for Jiri Prochazka. I think for Alex Pereira. He's Magomed Ankalaev. He's very well rounded. He's got a strange style where he can wrestle, but he certainly prefers to keep things standing. I think if the 2 guys do face each other, Ankalaev will be wrestling because You don't want to stand with um you do not want to stand with Alex Pereira for too long. Ankalaev, again, he's got quite a strange UFC career. He obviously was winning 14 minutes and 59 seconds of a fight before being submitted by Paul Craig in his debut. He then just went on a tear. He had that strange fight with Ion Cutelaba, and then the even stranger fight with yeah, he had the strange fight with Ion Cutelaba, and then just when you think that he should be, when he takes that step up from Ion Cutelaba to Nikita Krylov, goes to a decision. Then he takes on Volkan Ozdemir, goes to a decision. Then he takes on Thiago Santos, goes to a decision. Finishes Anthony Smith. Then he gets the shot at the vacant light heavyweight belt, draws with Jan Blachowicz. Then he faces Johnny Walker, goes through a no contest because he accidentally landed an illegal knee, and then he finishes Johnny Walker last time out in January. It's probably the fight they're going to make next is Poatan versus Ankalaev, but for me, a move up to heavyweight for some type of heavyweight championship, heavyweight title, whether that be John Jones's undisputed, or whether it be at the moment Tom Aspinall, potentially Curtis Blades' interim title. I think that's the fight to make. I really do. And I think you reward him for his activity. Alex Pereira, like I said, he fought 4 times within the past year. And in the past 11 months, he's fought 4 times, headlined 3 events, including the flagship MSG event, UFC 300, and now International Fight Week, filling in for one Conor McGregor. The UFC owe Alex Pereira, and I hope that they give him the heavyweight title shot. I don't think they will. I think they'll make Ankalaev next. But realistically, if you ask almost any fan who they want to see Alex Pereira fight next, it's going to be a heavyweight rather than Ankalaev. That was UFC 303. I'm going to briefly touch on PFL 6. Brendan Loughnane in the main event lands a vile knee to win, to stop Justin Gonzalez. Logan Storley wins a decision again. Logan Storley is a good fighter, but he's far from a fun fighter to watch. Umlatov wins. Lorenz Larkin wins in his PFL Bellator debut, whatever that is. I'm still not 100% sure what that is. They're pretty much the highlights. I don't think we had anything else this week. We had Invicta, where quite gutted. I like Olga Rubin. She lost by submission in the second round, sorry, to Talia Bernardo. Kay Hansen got back in the win column in that one. And then we're just going to look ahead. There's a little bit going on this week. Got one Fight Night 24. There's not an awful lot of MMA action, but that's certainly one if you can have it on. It's not a bad one to watch. Got Diaz versus Masvidal 2 in boxing. If anyone cares, I don't. Anthony Pettis taking on Chris Alvila in boxing. Danny Jacobs versus Shane Mosley Jr. is on that card. Yeah, that's happening. No UFC this week. We've got a week off the UFC. Which isn't always a bad thing in my opinion. I think, sometimes we need to let the UFC kind of breathe on it. So we can have a good old fallout from UFC 303 where, like I said, Alex Pereira is the standout. He is the dominant fighter in the division. He's a dominant fighter in the UFC. And in my opinion, he's top 3 pound for pound and deserves whatever he wants. Keep it locked to MMA Soccer channel on YouTube. I have released the first episode of Rescoring Controversial Fights, looking at Jones versus Reyes last week. I've got this week is GSP versus Johnny Hendricks. That'll be coming out either tomorrow or Tuesday. So keep it locked to MMA Soccer, guys. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to the channel, comment, like, and all that good stuff, and I'll catch you next time.